In this one, I'll be looking at David Mackenzie and his Canadian trucking magazine and a few aspects of something called the Biodigital Convergence and give my thoughts on predictive programming. So, David Mackenzie publishes like this monthly magazine here, and I've mentioned it in prior videos where I talked about the Save the Children convoy and the land claim that's in there. We'll be taking another look at that and other aspects of the magazine too. So he's also the founder, the publisher, and the editor of the magazine. And as well, something, unique here about his background is he served with the RCMP and the military, and as well, the trucking industry, like I was saying. He has a certificate for close protection training and detection of explosive and incendiary devices through the Government of Canada. And as well, he's part of something called the Tri-Service Military Association of Canada. So, his trucking magazine, for one thing, this is Walter Hebert or Herbert or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's Hiebert. And so, himself and others who I have mentioned in prior videos, like Ron Clark, essentially turned a blind eye to somebody who had this particular charge coming in with a teddy bear costume, and his at Camp Hope in Manitoba, that place, it had full families and stuff, so that's beyond reckless. And so he essentially tries to justify that, and Ron Clark as well has stood by him in those regards. So as well, they promote the NCI here and the National Citizens Inquiry. And so I had already made a video in regards to that, but I think the bigger aspect now in hindsight, which I didn't mention in that video, is that they don't really touch on the biodigital convergence to my knowledge, and anybody can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. It's just that all these, we'll say things like digital ID and, the passport and the coercive measures and stuff like that taken, which they say is for our health, which we know is not. All of those things really are just stepping stones toward what's called the biodigital convergence, and so that term was brought to me by somebody named James Scott. And then there's a portion of research in this video that mostly I've obtained that information through James Scott, and so I'll be referencing him throughout. And so he's also the guy that brought that term to me, and we're going to talk about it a little further as we go forward. So the people that are on here, for one thing, other than Gordon Berry, who is not native, all these other people, I guess, claim to be, and I'm not sure if they are, and the reason why I'm hesitant about that is because there are groups like the Asmin and Peoples of the Salmon, and they're all part of something called the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, and not all of these people are actually native. The reason why that term indigenous is used is because in UNDRIP there are all these land and resource rights given to quote-unquote indigenous people, but in UNDRIP that's not even truly defined. And so the Alliance of Indigenous Nations support UNDRIP and other things as well, like the Paris Agreement, Nisara Jasara, and stuff like that. So anyway, with this whole ordeal, I just want to say with Gordon Berry, Ron Clark, and a few others are figurehead leaders of the Save the Children convoy, if you will. And so with that, there is a sort of plan, I guess, that involved, arresting different politicians and stuff throughout Ottawa, and, different locations that would be hit, like the Privy Council and the Department of Defense, etc. And so with this kind of a thing in mind, apparently Veterans for Freedom, a so-called freedom group with, the number 4 slapped right in the center, like a lot of these organizations, supposedly leaked this plan, if you will, blew the whistle. But the reality of the situation is that when you go back toward Marcus Ray and a lot of these references I'm making, people will have to watch prior videos for, which will be in the description. With Marcus Ray's plans, so to speak, which is likely just another figurehead, it also involved arresting different politicians and these kinds of things. So this Save the Children Convoy plan is just a mirror, and Gordon Berry is direct friends with Marcus Ray. So I've already covered that and my personal dealings with Gordon as well. So anyway, this is a sort of land claim that they have in southern Ontario. I'll just read this first. All brothers and sisters from Turtle Island are hereby invited by the authority of the Great Spirit to the sovereign unceded territory of the hereditary Algonquin Nation to peacefully assemble and parley regarding a constitutional confederacy on or before December 21st, 2023. The invitation is granted under the International Flag of Peace. A white square flag must be flown. No regular corporate flags will be allowed during this peaceful event. Okay, so with this area that's in mind, you see North Bay, it's like the far west, if you will, and Huntsville is outside of its boundaries along with Brockville. But you see just east of Ottawa here, the whole landmass is kind of swallowed up. And so with that in mind, just taking into account military bases in Ontario, you have, let me look at this list here again. You essentially have very few that are inside and then few that are outside of it. So the ones that are outside, you have Camp Borden, which is basically like, it doesn't just deal with Army. There's Air Force and all kinds of different, we'll say, military forces overall that are in Borden. You have Petawawa, which is an Army base. And then you also have Kingston. And then you have North Bay, which is an Air Force base. And then Trenton, which is another Air Force base. What I'm saying is all of those are outside of that land claim, if you will. But the only bases that are within the boundaries of that land claim is a Canadian Forces Support Group, Canadian Forces Health Services Center, and as well, lastly speaking, you have Leitrim. Where is Leitrim? Canadian Forces base in Leitrim that's like an area in Ottawa. And why am I having a hard time finding it? Just give me half a second here. Moose Jaw, North Bay, and then Canadian Forces Station Leitrim. So that one in particular is a communications center of sorts. And so within that communications center, you have the Echelon system. And the Echelon was originally a secret government code name. With surveillance programs, signals intelligence / SIGINT collection and analysis network, and it's operated by 5 signatory states to the UK-USA Security Agreement. So this is the 5 Eyes. The 5 Eyes are Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and United States. So you have a communications department that operates within the 5 Eyes that is within that land claim. So it's interesting that you have the communications department and then, support group and health service within, and then all of the bases that have the majority of troops and stuff like that are stationed outside of this land claim. So, people can make of that what they want. I just thought that was worthy observation. So, you have him supporting, Save the Children, right? And then in the next page you have, advertising Hooters, which, make of that what you will. But I just think that that's really in poor taste. And then he's also sponsoring Police on Guard for Thee here. Or rather, I shouldn't say sponsoring, but advertising for Police on Guard for Thee. And I did make a video, I guess, about them, but I mostly talked about like Mozid and what they're affiliated with, rather than really actually talk about them. But essentially here I'll be making reference to Canuck Law, as she does great corporate research and also research on politics in Canada and as well the States too. So, and she's also called out the controlled opposition too. So, kudos to her for calling out both sides of the narrative. So, there are these lesser known lawsuits against the lockdown measures that were filed in April 2021, and neither have had a single court appearance, and both are Children's Health Defence and Police on Guard, and they were filed wrong in Ontario for one thing. And it says here, according to sections 2 and 6 of the judicial review procedure, litigation involves a compulsion order or a prohibition. Must be an application for judicial review. It also needs to be filed in divisional court unless leave, which is permission, is granted. And so Police on Guard asks for prohibition, and Children's Health Defense case asks for prohibition and also a mandamus. And it doesn't appear that the permission was ever obtained or ever sought in order to try these cases in Superior Court as opposed to divisional. And consequently, they would probably be thrown out for the lack of jurisdiction if they were ever challenged. Of course, it has to be asked why they haven't yet been challenged. Perhaps there's an agreement among the parties to just let these sit. And yeah, I would agree with that statement for sure. And so it says they haven't had a single court appearance. Yeah, exactly. And then they basically recycle from previous content that was already struck down in court. And essentially, it's fair to really just call Police on Guard a lobbying and fundraising firm. And, right, would you really want to be funding people that have cases that really go nowhere? And again, also, you know, the lockdowns or any one of these, like, I don't want to call them little things, right, but they all bleed into what's called the Biodigital Convergence, right, which again, we're going to get to. So that's really the bigger picture of all this. And with this in mind, you know, Police on Guard for Thee, as well as Vets for Freedom, you know, put out a notice having to do with the plans of the Save the Children convoy, right? You know, posing as whistleblowers, we'll say, right? So, you know, Police on Guard for Thee have to do with this because the way I look at it is Marcus Ray's plans consisted of ex-police and ex-military. So, and that's exactly what Police on Guard for Thee and Vets for Freedom are. So, and then we see him, you know, promote the Canadian Border Services Agency and, you know, promoting national defense and also, we'll say, frontline workers here and as well. So specifically military, vets, law enforcement, police, fire, rescue, border protection, DOT, MOT, and, you know, frontline workers essentially. So here's his promotion for Police on Guard for Thee, Wounded Warriors. People can go through this at their will. I just want to see if there's anything else worth noting. Yeah, so essentially added this in, but this is one of the posters for the East Meets West Save the Children convoy. And, you know, promoting different restaurants and stuff like that, casino, SEMA, and as well the QR code. Like, I definitely have my thoughts about QR codes in and of themselves because that all has to do with that convergence as well. It's basically quick response. You know, quick response, quick data grab, right? And so with different organizations and their contracts that they have each other and partnerships, it's just like how much data is really transferred, you know, between not even just those individuals, but how much data are you even just surrendering when you scan a QR code, you know what I mean? It seemed like that was, you know, that has to do with, you know, quote unquote health pass, if you will. And it eventually turned into restaurants having menus and stuff that way, and then workplaces getting that, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like become, you know, put into people's daily lives when I think with all the data grabs and stuff like that, I don't think that that's entirely ethical. and somebody can be used to it now type of a thing, and then they'll just step forward that much further, so it's better to stand up sooner rather than later. And so yeah, we see him as well, promoting different people in the Save the Children convoy, like Freedom George or Tyson Billings as his name is, and then Ron Clark, and of course you've got Walter Herbert. And is there anything else worth mentioning here? NASCAR, not really. Okay, so let's move forward here. Okay, so now for basically the biodigital portion of this agenda here, of this video, this is Maggie Braun. I've spoke about her as she was like promoting direct democracy, and the thing that doesn't really make sense is if V4F spoke out against the Save the Children convoy, right? And she, works with the Save the Children convoy and Vets for Freedom, how does that make sense, right? So it's almost like you have these certain people that almost are like, I guess we'll call them diplomats or ambassadors. I don't really know what the term is that they use in their inner circles, but they would have these sort of people that would, if there's supposed to be a public image of two groups having, hostility between each other or whatever, they have these go-between people, right? And that's exactly where people like Maggie Braun and sometimes Kellyanne Wolf function. So with this in mind, just want to show some images here. So I think it was up until what date roughly? That's November 2022, and then the first time the QR codes were around was pretty much at the start, not the first issue of the magazine, but the second one. So from January 2021 to November 2022, you had the whole QR code thing with druthers. So here you have it, and then you have as well, so Gather 2030 is Maggie Braun's initiative, right? And of course, you then got the QR code there. And interesting, this is from 2012 here, HSBC Bank. It says your DNA will be your data, but it should say our data. And normally I don't like to include memes and stuff like that, but I think that it's appropriate for this one. It says this is how we end up in a digital enslavement system starter pack. So, so yeah, here's where we talk about the biodigital convergence a little bit, right? So, Policy Horizons Canada, which is created through the Privy Council of Canada. Kristel Van der Elst is the CEO, or sorry, the Director General at Policy Horizons Canada, and as well, we'll look at some of her information, and it was funny because as I was gathering this information, and I don't know about today in particular, but the Policy Horizons website is actually down for maybe maintenance or something. So not only is she the Director General of Policy Horizons, but she has 20 years experience in forward-looking strategy and policy advisory roles. Okay, well, that's interesting because Policy Horizons Canada heads up the whole biodigital convergence that I was talking about. And she holds an MBA from the Yale School of Management, Master's in Development Cooperation from the University of Ghent, and a Master's in Commercial Engineering from the Free University of Brussels. She's a Fulbright Scholar, a Rotary Foundation Ambassadorial Scholar, and a Global Leadership Fellow, and a Certified Professional Facilitator. Okay? And then she's also got a page on the World Economic Forum, which she's also a member of, or was, as she's the former head of Strategic Foresight at WEF. She's also the CEO of something called the Global Foresight Group, which we'll be looking at, and she's a special advisor to the European Commission, vice president, and a fellow at the Center for Strategic Foresight of the U.S. Government Accountability Office. So she has ties between both the United States and Canada, and also you have the WEF and the Global Foresight Group is kind of like the middle grounds here. So Also, I just want to say, again, everything having to do with Policy Horizons Canada and that particular woman I was talking about, and also the Global Foresight Group, all comes through James Scott. So it says here the overall goal of the Global Foresight Group is to contribute toward the establishment of international frameworks, rules to better enable rapid response mechanisms to address future outbreaks, whether natural or human sourced. This includes therapeutic solutions developed, produced, and distributed through a sufficiently robust global network of R&D institutions, production platforms, and facilities, and supply chains, and distribution networks. So basically this is like this kind of preparedness, I can't say this word, scamdemic, surveillance and response. So they have essentially work that revolves around, regulating genetic manipulation technologies, and as well, so they basically deal with surveillance, AI, biology, and, that kind of a thing. And some of the institutions that they basically partner with are the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the IMF, United Nations, World Trade Organization, and specifically the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, I'm going to take a brief look at. And then, of course, as well, the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. So what a lot of these people do, these corporate CEOs and stuff like that, is, they look at every crisis as an opportunity, as Klaus Schwab would say. So it says here that in that particular sickness scenario, if you will, it's exposed just how deeply the digital divide hurts those who don't have reliable internet, and how much work is needed to ensure that opportunities for work, education, and public services reach everybody. Our response is designed to help decision makers look beyond recovery towards 2030, making choices and managing complexity and uncertainty in 4 main areas: governance, social protection, the green economy, and digital disruption. So this is an interesting video. I would suggest people actually take the 15 minutes to watch, but in a nutshell, what you have is, let me just pause this. In a nutshell, what you have here, what's called the Internet of Bio-Nano things.
Hello everyone.
The way that we get to this Internet of Bio-Nano things is you have the Internet of Things, Internet of Nano Things, and the Internet of Bio-Nano Things. So the Internet of Things refers to connected devices which can collect and transmit data over the Internet to expand the application base of IoT. You have the Internet of Nano Things, which was introduced and facilitated devices in the nanoscale to have network connectivity. But these devices, when deployed in the environment or inside human body, imposes a serious threat because of their artificial nature and electromagnetic communication inside the biological. So this led to the advent of another interesting research domain called Internet of Bio-Nano Things, which could mimic the functions of a biological cell, and it promised to serve all applications in the biochemical domain by leveraging the existing tools of synthetic biology and nanotechnology. So the Internet of Bio-Nano Things is a biological embedded computing device which gathers from and transmits information to the biological domain, and also has an interface with the electrical domain of the Internet. So at some point I'm going to probably look into the architecture and the way this works in more depth, but what I will say is that this is almost like a gateway for me because it's not something I was unaware of in and of itself in terms of the agenda to amalgamate biology and cybernetic together, but I wasn't so deeply aware of the organizations that were involved in this, and I also wasn't really aware of a lot of the terminology that they use and stuff like that, and also the science behind it, whereas James Scott is a lot more knowledgeable in that department. So that's why I'm just consistently throwing his name out there, as he understands this stuff, much better than I do. But the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because all of these things like, digital ID, that passport, whatever, all of those things are just stepping stones toward, what Policy Horizons Canada calls the Biodigital Convergence. And other organizations, might call it something else or whatever. It doesn't really matter what term you want to use. But that ultimately is the goal, to control, carbon-based life, as these people would probably look at it, right? And so that's why all of these things like Agenda 2030 or the Paris Agreement, even Jasara, because the Great Awakening and the Great Reset are one and the same, as I've covered in several videos. They all streamline toward this biodigital convergence of sorts. And so what I want to say now, just so some of my thoughts on predictive programming, is that, I ended up making this video about J.D. Anderson, which I'll link in the description. It's not a bad video or anything, but I'm talking about the Smart City Agenda. And so I was talking about it in Manitoba and how J.D. Anderson, through Okima Development Authority, has, the Smart City project, right? And so what I'm saying is that there's all this, fear-driven dialogue and stuff around 15-minute cities and crap like this. And so what happens is, the reason why I think having made that video in hindsight kind of does play into these people's hands is because even though, yes, I've alerted people about some kind of agenda and I did do the right thing, is that I've also helped put an idea into people's subconscious and into people's, conscious mind too, as, people are either scared or angry or some kind of, low resonating emotion, I guess. So, but the thing is, ultimately, once you break down the modus operandi of the way these dark people function, you can start looking for solutions and a way to, not even just speak out against these people, but practical solutions on dealing with these particular issues, right? And so, now just talking about predictive programming here is, you have stuff like the Illuminati card game and, which shows 9/11 and, The Simpsons has done that too. And as well, there's the truck convoy. And so what happens is, with all this predictive programming, it just shows, a small glimpse of how something may happen, right? And it's mixed between truth and deception. So that's why the greatest truths are always told in the form of a lie. And that's why predictive programming is a thing. So, as well, I'm including this link here because this line in this movie Metro with Eddie Murphy, this particular line, I'm not going to read it, but this is the kind of mentality, if you will, that these people behind closed doors have. And so this is the kind of thing that they want to instill in us, because when you think sometimes you are making a difference, you actually are doing a lot of damage inevitably too. And so some of these things are like double-edged swords. And so now, through growth, understanding, and, ultimately personal experience and stuff, I can kind of say, that having made that video about J.D. Anderson and Smart City thing really didn't even cover the full scope of the agenda, the biodigital convergence. But, it's a learning experience. And so now that people are aware of this, they can start digging a little bit and they can talk about the bigger picture, right? Because fusing AI and biological life is how you, reduce or control carbon-based life, as these people, talk about, right? So, Anyway, thanks for watching, and links will be in the description, and as well, I'll probably pin in the comments James Scott's Facebook page, and if he has any other channels or people know who he is, they can just plug that in, or I'll try to get that information from him to pin if he has like TikTok or something like that. So yeah, thanks for watching, and people can once again, go to the comments and reach me there, or find me on Facebook at Matt Unseated with no the in between. Thanks for watching, everyone.